Picture this. It's 1918, and somewhere in the depths of a government facility, the sound of industrial furnaces drowns out everything else. Workers are feeding silver coins into massive melting pots, watching as pieces of American history dissolve into molten metal. Not dozens of coins, not thousands, but 270 million silver dollars vanishing forever in what would become the largest planned destruction of American currency in history. Most people have never heard of the Pittman Act, but this single piece of legislation wiped out nearly half of every Morgan silver dollar ever minted, creating artificial rarities that collectors are still discovering today. And the reason it happened reveals something disturbing about how governments treat money when they're desperate, because this wasn't about economics or monetary policy, this was about survival. In 1918, America was fighting the war to end all wars, and one of its most important allies was on the brink of financial collapse. Not from bombs or bullets, but from something far more insidious. The Germans had discovered they could destroy Britain without ever setting foot on British soil. They could attack the empire's financial system, and if they succeeded, Britain would be forced out of the war at the moment when victory was finally within reach. The weapon wasn't a new type of artillery or poison gas, it was rumors. Whispers that Britain couldn't back its silver certificates, and these rumors were spreading like wildfire through India, threatening to bring down the entire British colonial financial system. If that happened, the empire would lose its ability to pay for the war, and Germany would win not through military might, but through financial warfare. The United States faced a choice: watch its most crucial ally crumble under economic pressure, or take drastic action. The solution came from an unlikely source: Senator Pittman of Nevada, a man whose state nickname was literally the Silver State. His proposal was radical, unprecedented, and would change American numismatics forever. Melt down hundreds of millions of silver dollars and ship the bullion to Britain. But here's what makes this story so fascinating. The scale of destruction was so massive that if you stacked every melted coin on top of each other, the tower would stretch over 400 miles into the sky. If you laid them end to end, they would create a silver chain stretching from New York to Los Angeles more than 2.5 times. This wasn't just monetary policy. This was the systematic erasure of nearly half a century of American silver dollar production. And the most chilling part? Most Americans had no idea it was happening. While soldiers fought in European trenches, armed guards were transporting trainloads of silver dollars to melting facilities in Philadelphia, San Francisco, and Denver. The operation was so secretive that records of exactly which coins were destroyed were never kept. The government wanted ounces of silver, not history, and that missing documentation created mysteries that numismatists are still trying to solve today. To understand how we got to this point, you need to understand what was happening in 1918. The war had been grinding on for 4 brutal years. Entire generations of young men had been fed into the meat grinder of trench warfare. Resources were stretched beyond breaking points, and just when it seemed like the Allies might finally push Germany back, the Germans launched their most devastating attack yet. Not against soldiers, but against money itself. The target was India, the crown jewel of the British Empire. For decades, Britain had issued silver certificates backed by its silver reserves. These certificates were the foundation of trade across the empire, trusted from London to Calcutta. But in 1918, German agents began spreading rumors that Britain didn't actually have enough silver to back these certificates, that the empire was financially hollow. The psychology was brilliant and terrifying. Money only works when people believe in it. The moment doubt creeps in, the entire system can collapse overnight. And that's exactly what started happening. Indians began demanding actual silver in exchange for their certificates. Banks that had operated smoothly for generations suddenly faced runs. The empire that ruled a quarter of the world was being brought to its knees by whispers and fear. Britain's response was desperate. They began buying up American silver bullion, trying to shore up their reserves before confidence collapsed completely. But there was a problem. The United States was also at war, and it needed to conserve its gold reserves for its own war effort. Selling gold to Britain would weaken America's financial position just when it needed strength most. Enter Senator Pittman, a man whose political career was built on understanding silver markets. Nevada had become rich during the silver rushes of the 19th century, when precious metal could literally be scooped up from the ground. Pittman knew that America had something Britain needed desperately: hundreds of millions of silver dollars sitting in vaults, far more than were actually needed for domestic commerce. His solution was elegantly simple and brutally effective. Why not melt down America's excess silver dollars and sell the bullion to Britain? The United States would help its ally without depleting its gold reserves. Britain would get the silver it needed to back its certificates, and Nevada's silver mines would benefit from guaranteed government purchases to replace the melted coins. On April 22, 1918, the Pittman Act became law. The legislation had a deceptively bland official title, but its purposes were sweeping. Conserve American gold supplies, permit settlement of trade balances in silver, provide silver for coinage and commercial use, assist Allied governments fighting America's enemies, and stabilize silver prices while encouraging domestic production. Hidden within that bureaucratic language was authorization for something unprecedented in American monetary history. The government could melt up to 350 million silver dollars and convert them into bullion. The scale was staggering. To put it in perspective, this single act would destroy more silver coins than some entire nations had ever minted in their histories. The logistics alone were nightmarish. Silver dollars had to be transported from banks and treasury vaults across the country to melting facilities. Trains loaded with millions of coins, each one containing nearly an ounce of pure silver, rolled across America under armed guard. Railway robbery was a real concern when each car contained treasure worth more than most people would see in lifetimes. At the melting facilities, workers faced an almost incomprehensible task. Coins arrived in bulk, had to be sorted, counted, and fed into industrial furnaces. The sheer volume was overwhelming. Picture trying to process 270 million individual objects, each one a piece of American monetary history, and reducing them all to anonymous lumps of metal. But the most revealing aspect of the entire operation was what wasn't recorded. The government kept meticulous track of the total weight of silver produced, but they didn't document which specific coins were destroyed. A Morgan dollar, minted in San Francisco in 1893, was treated exactly the same as one struck in Philadelphia in 1904. History didn't matter, rarity didn't matter, only the silver content mattered. This indifference to numismatic value created consequences that are still unfolding today. When collectors try to determine how many examples of specific dates and mint marks survived the Pittman Act, they're working with incomplete information. Some coins that were common before 1918 became rare, simply because most examples happened to be in the wrong vault at the wrong time. Others that seemed rare remained common because they were stored where the melting crews never reached them. The human drama behind these cold statistics reveals something profound about how governments treat citizen wealth during crises. Every melted coin represented someone's savings, someone's trust in the monetary system. Workers, farmers, and merchants had accepted these silver dollars in exchange for labor and goods, believing they were storing value for the future. Instead, their money became raw material for international diplomacy, and the operation succeeded brilliantly at its intended purpose. Britain received the silver bullion it needed, honored its certificates, and remained financially stable. The German strategy of economic warfare failed. India's banking system held firm. The British Empire stayed in the war and helped secure Allied victory. But the price was extraordinary. By some estimates, only 10% of all Morgan silver dollars ever minted still exist today, thanks largely to the Pittman Act's destruction. Collectors and historians lost access to hundreds of millions of artifacts that could have told the story of America's monetary development. Future generations were left with gaps in the historical record that can never be filled. The replacement program that followed reveals just how thoroughly the government had transformed American silver dollar collecting without most citizens realizing what had happened. In 1921, 3 years after the war ended, the U.S. Mint began the process of replacing every melted coin as required by the Pittman Act. But here's the twist that collectors discovered decades later. The replacement coins could never restore what was actually lost. The new silver dollars struck in 1921 used the familiar Morgan design, but they came from freshly mined silver purchased at artificially high prices from Nevada and other western states. The government paid $1 per ounce, well above market rates, creating what amounted to a federal subsidy for the silver mining industry. Senator Pittman had crafted legislation that simultaneously helped win a war and guaranteed profits for his constituents back home. But something strange started happening in the numismatic world. Coin dealers and collectors began noticing that certain dates and mint marks that should have been common were nowhere to be found. Others that had seemed rare before 1918 were still relatively available. The pattern made no sense until people started piecing together the storage methods used by the Treasury Department. The most dramatic example involved Carson City silver dollars, coins minted in Nevada between 1878 and 1893. Carson City had always been a smaller mint, producing fewer coins than Philadelphia or San Francisco. Logic suggested that most Carson City Morgans would have been melted along with everything else. But collectors kept finding them, even though they should have been among the scarcest survivors. The answer lay in bureaucratic filing systems that nobody had thought about during the melting operations. When the Carson City Mint closed in 1893, its remaining silver dollars were shipped back east to treasury vaults in Washington. These coins weren't mixed with the general population of silver dollars. They were stored separately, stacked in bags at the back of the vaults. When the Pittman Act melting began in 1918, workers simply grabbed coins from the most accessible locations. They worked their way through the front and middle sections of the vaults, melting millions of dollars from major mints like Philadelphia and San Francisco. But they never reached the Carson City coins stored in the back corners. Those bags sat untouched, forgotten in the darkness, while their more common cousins were destroyed. This storage accident created one of the most incredible treasure discoveries in American numismatic history, but it wouldn't be found for nearly 50 years. The Carson City hoard remained hidden in government vaults through the Great Depression, World War II, the Korean War, and well into the Cold War era. Meanwhile, collectors paid premium prices for Carson City Morgans, believing they were among the scarcest survivors of the Pittman Act melting. The truth emerged only in 1964, when the government stopped redeeming silver certificates for actual silver dollars. Treasury officials conducting inventory discovered something that shouldn't have existed: approximately 3 million silver dollars that had somehow escaped both circulation and the melting pots. Nearly 2.5 million of these were Carson City Morgans, sitting exactly where they had been placed in 1893. The discovery sent shockwaves through the collecting community. Coins that had been selling for hundreds of dollars were suddenly available by the millions. The government faced a dilemma: flood the market and crash values, or find a controlled way to release the hoard. They chose the latter, creating the General Services Administration sales that would revolutionize how Americans thought about coin collecting. But the Carson City story illustrates a darker truth about the Pittman Act's legacy. The randomness of survival had nothing to do with historical importance or rarity. It came down to storage locations, bureaucratic procedures, and pure chance. Coins that documented important moments in American monetary history were destroyed not because they lacked value, but because they happened to be in the wrong place when the melting crews arrived. The international implications were equally profound. The 209 million ounces of silver bullion shipped to Britain didn't just help win a war. It established precedents for how allied nations could liquidate domestic assets to support each other during crises. The Pittman Act proved that America was willing to sacrifice significant portions of its monetary heritage for strategic purposes. This precedent would echo through later conflicts and financial crises. During World War II, similar discussions arose about liquidating gold reserves. During the Cold War, strategic metal stockpiles became weapons in economic warfare. The idea that money could be treated as raw material rather than historical artifact had been normalized by the Pittman Act's success. For ordinary Americans, the long-term consequences were subtler but equally significant. The artificial scarcities created by random destruction patterns meant that coin collecting became less about preserving monetary history and more about chasing rarities created by government policy. Collectors found themselves paying premium prices for coins that were rare not because of limited original mintages, but because most examples had been melted for diplomatic purposes. The silver mining industry, meanwhile, enjoyed decades of benefits from the replacement provisions. Every melted coin had to be replaced with a new one struck from freshly purchased domestic silver. This guaranteed market created artificial demand that kept marginal mines profitable long after they would have closed under normal market conditions. Nevada's economy received a boost that lasted well into the Great Depression era. But perhaps the most unsettling aspect of the entire episode was how effectively the government had kept the operation secret from the American people. While soldiers were dying in European trenches, while families were buying war bonds and rationing food, millions of silver dollars were disappearing from the monetary system without public debate or acknowledgement. The trains carrying coins to melting facilities operated under military guard, but they weren't protecting the silver from enemy agents. They were protecting it from American citizens who might have objected to seeing their nation's monetary heritage destroyed for diplomatic purposes. The secrecy wasn't about operational security. It was about avoiding political consequences. This pattern of monetary manipulation during crises had been established. When governments face existential threats, the historical and cultural value of money becomes secondary to its utility as raw material. Citizens who had accepted silver dollars in good faith, believing they were storing wealth for the future, discovered that their government viewed those coins as nothing more than convenient sources of bullion. The Pittman Act succeeded in its immediate objectives. Britain remained financially stable. The German economic warfare strategy failed. The Allies won the war. But the precedent had been set for treating citizen wealth as government resource during emergencies, and that precedent would prove more durable than any of the silver dollars that survived the melting pots of 1918. The mystery of which specific coins were destroyed continues to intrigue numismatists today. Without detailed records of the melting process, collectors can only estimate survival rates based on market observations and educated guesswork. Some dates that should be common based on original mintage figures command high prices because most examples were apparently melted. Others remain affordable despite their age and historical significance. This uncertainty has created an entire subfield of numismatic research, with collectors and dealers trying to piece together clues about which coins survived and which vanished forever. These coins aren't just collectibles anymore. They're refugees from one of the most systematic destructions of American heritage ever conducted by the federal government. Each surviving example represents dozens of others that were sacrificed to diplomatic necessity. Professional coin dealers who lived through the aftermath describe a fundamental shift in how Americans viewed their money. Before 1918, silver dollars were simply currency, trusted and familiar. After the Pittman Act, they became artifacts. People began hoarding them not because they needed the money, but because they understood that the government could make them disappear at any moment. The trust between citizen and currency had been permanently altered. The technical aspects of the melting operation reveal just how industrial the destruction process became. Workers at facilities in Philadelphia, San Francisco, and Denver developed specialized techniques for processing massive quantities of coins efficiently. Furnaces had to be modified to handle the volume. New procedures were created for sorting, weighing, and documenting the conversion of coins into standardized bullion bars. The silver itself tells its own story. Unlike paper money, which can be printed endlessly, every ounce of silver in those coins had been mined from specific locations, refined through specific processes, and shaped by specific mints. The bullion bars shipped to Britain contained silver from mines across the American West, each ounce representing decades of dangerous underground labor. Miners who had risked their lives extracting silver from Nevada mountainsides could never have imagined their work would end up supporting British banks thousands of miles away. Britain's use of the American silver was swift and strategic. The bullion arrived at precisely the moment when confidence in British silver certificates was wavering most dangerously. British officials were able to announce immediate backing for their currency, stopping the run on banks before it could spread beyond India. The German strategy of financial warfare collapsed within weeks of the first American silver shipments arriving in London. But the broader implications for international monetary systems were just beginning to unfold. The Pittman Act had demonstrated that national currencies could be treated as strategic resources, subject to liquidation and transfer between allies during crises. This precedent would influence monetary policy decisions for decades, establishing expectations that domestic money supplies could be sacrificed for diplomatic objectives. The replacement program that began in 1921 created its own set of economic distortions. The federal government's commitment to purchase newly mined silver at $1 per ounce, regardless of market conditions, artificially inflated silver prices across the American West. Mining operations that would have closed under normal market pressures suddenly became profitable again. Towns that had been dying since the end of the silver boom experienced unexpected revivals. Nevada's economy received the most dramatic boost. The state's senators had crafted legislation that guaranteed federal purchases of their primary export for more than a decade. Every melted Morgan dollar had to be replaced with a new coin struck from domestic silver, creating artificial demand that kept marginal mines operating well into the 1920s. It was economic stimulus disguised as monetary policy, and it worked exactly as intended. The new silver dollars struck under the replacement program carried their own historical significance. The 1921 Morgan dollars were the last of their kind, representing the final chapter of a design that had defined American silver coinage for nearly half a century. But collectors today view these replacement coins with mixed emotions. They represent restoration, but they also serve as reminders of everything that was lost. The peace dollars that followed in late 1921 were explicitly designed to commemorate the end of World War I. Their allegorical imagery of liberty and eagles carried messages about American victory and hope for lasting peace. But numismatists understood the deeper symbolism. These coins were struck from silver purchased to replace the Morgan dollars that had been sacrificed for that very victory. Every peace dollar was a monument to the coins that died so the design could exist. The cultural impact extended beyond collecting circles. American families who had saved silver dollars as nest eggs or gifts for children discovered that their careful hoarding meant nothing if the government decided those coins were needed for other purposes. The Pittman Act taught an entire generation that money was not permanent, that currency could be recalled and destroyed regardless of individual ownership or sentimental value. This lesson would prove prophetic during subsequent monetary crises. The gold recall of 1933 followed similar patterns, with private ownership of gold coins being outlawed and existing coins being confiscated for remelting. The precedent established by the Pittman Act made such actions seem less radical, more acceptable as normal government prerogatives during economic emergencies. The international ramifications continued to unfold throughout the 1920s and beyond. Other nations began studying American willingness to liquidate domestic monetary assets for strategic purposes. The idea that money could be weaponized, converted from currency to diplomatic tool, became part of standard international relations theory. The Pittman Act had inadvertently created a new category of economic warfare. The Pittman Act stands as one of history's most revealing lessons about what governments will sacrifice when survival is at stake. In a single year, America melted away nearly half of its silver dollar heritage, erasing monetary history to save an empire and win a war. The 270 million coins that vanished into those furnaces weren't just currency. They were trust made tangible, and their destruction proved that no government promise is permanent when crisis comes calling. Today, every surviving Morgan dollar carries the scars of that betrayal, reminding us that money is only as stable as the powers that control it. History doesn't repeat, but if you ignore these lessons, the pattern will crush you all the same.